The African Union has suspended Niger from all activities of the AU nearly 1 month after a military coup ousted President Mohamed Bazoum. The AU has called on its member states to refrain from any action which could grant legitimacy to Niger's coup leaders. The AU has also warned against any interference in African security affairs from anyone outside the continent, including mercenaries from private military companies. Meanwhile, here in Nigeria, ECOWAS envoy General Abdulsalami Abubakar says he is optimistic that diplomatic efforts will prevail in Niger. The former military leader met with President Bola Tinubu, who doubles as ECOWAS chairman, to formally present the terms given by the military junta for the settlement of the political crisis. Niger coup leader General Abdurrahmani Chiani has proposed a 3-year transition of power after meeting the ECOWAS delegation led by General Abubakar.
I must say that our visit to Niger has been very fruitful, and that it has opened an avenue to start talking, and hopefully we will get somewhere. We started talking. We made their own points, and then I made my report to the chairman of the ECOWAS Heads of State and President. He will now consult with his colleagues, and then the ding-dong starts, and we'll get somewhere. Hopefully, diplomacy will see the better of this thing. Nobody wants to go to war. It doesn't pay anybody. But then again, you know, our leaders have said, if all fails, and I don't think all will fail, we'll get somewhere. We'll get out of this mess.
All right, General Abdulsalami Abubakar, optimistic that dialogue will be the way and it wouldn't fail. Kay, your thoughts on this story?
Well, I am also very optimistic. I was a bit disappointed when I heard that AU was suspending or actually removing Niger from membership. And that was a big disappointment because I thought they would have learned from what happened through ECOWAS the other day, when ECOWAS decided their first point of call will be a stern warning that we're ready to go to war with you if you don't do what we've asked you to do. AU should not be suspending Niger. AU should be the big daddy that is making sure that, okay, if ECOWAS was shouting for war, you will make sure that you call them to order and say, everybody, come to the table, come to Addis Ababa, or come somewhere in South Africa and let's sit down and discuss this. Africa is in a pivotal position to do great things for the next 10, 20 years because of the number of young people on this side of the divide, on the continent of Africa. We're the big bride, we're the beautiful bride because of the number of young people. So Niger has a lot of young people, and what we should be doing is encourage the military men who are taking over power to come to the table, have conversation like General Abdulsalami Abubakar has said. They should come and have conversation. I don't think there is any other option. Fighting within the continent will only decimate the continent, will only destroy the continent, and will make it impossible for us to progress as a continent. So that's my position. I think it is absolutely essential that conversation has got to consistently be the only solution we're looking at. Jaw and not war.
Right. Thank you very much, Kay. Fine.
So for me, I welcome the suspension by the AU on Niger. And there's a couple of reasons that the AU cited. The AU said that it doesn't want any other African country to go in that line of endorsing what has happened in Niger. And we can't have a continent where we endorse pretty much coups. And when we endorse coups, it has a blowback effect. And this suspension is also part of the punitive measures already, like the sanctions. Yes, a lot of people have argued against the sanctions. That is the people that suffer the most. But also the counter-argument is, probably if those sanctions were not put in place, maybe the Nigerian coup plotters would not be talking by now. So anything to be able to make the coup plotters understand that coups are not welcome on the African continent, because it has increasingly become the order of the day on the African continent, and almost every leader goes on a coup, and a coup binge, pretty much. And we can't have this level of instability where our nations are run just by the prowess or how strong, the military officers are. What I don't support is a war and an invasion of the country, because you know the beginning of a war, but you don't know the end. So I think this is a welcome development. But secondly, there's also something we should be worried about. Only yesterday, a video made the rounds that 2 Antonov planes, and if you know Antonov planes, they are really big, military planes and military transport planes, came in. But they didn't just come in. They came in with a certain man named Yevgeny Prigozhin, and they landed in Mali. They brought in weapons. The leader of Wagner is already on the African continent and is beginning to recruit people. And the dynamics have changed. And you would think that this was the same Mali that the ECOWAS tried to intervene in their matter. Assimi Goïta gave them some assurances, and the next thing, he reneged on those assurances, and he's continued frolicking with Russia. It should be on record that after we finally fight up all this insurgency as a result of the blowback of the Libyan crisis, the next form of battles we'll fight for the next 10, 15 years of the African continent will be remnants of Russian mercenaries, well-trained, and have access to weapons. We're already building the conflict of the next decade already with having Russian mercenaries on ground. I'll give you a point to extrapolate, to expatiate on that. Just like the Americans did with the Mujahideens. After the Cold War, the Mujahideens now became the opponents of the Americans. So we should be careful. And this is the same Mali that is pledging support to Niger. And Yevgeny Prigozhin had the effrontery to land in Mali, brought weapons in. We are losing this West African sub-region, and that's why, like former president, former leader Absalam Abubakar said, talks will continue with Niger. Let's set a timeline to return to democracy. Hopefully that works. And let's also put a standby force on ground. Because yes, I'm a vacillating man, and when I see things, and when I see dimensions to argument, I change. Because when you have a new empirical fact on ground, you have to be able to table the matter sincerely. In all of this, the force on ground that have been put in place, yes, we might not support an invasion. I don't support an invasion. But let it also be as a reminder to these Nigerians that we can't go this way on the African continent. And I am sad. And for me, this issue of Yevgeny Prigozhin being on ground in Mali just, turns everything around and upside down for me. I want us to still dialogue, but let's also remind ourselves that we can't continue on this path on the African continent. And if we continue on this path, there's going to be problems. And I'm happy that the AU has suspended Niger, owing to when Niger will do what is right, and the conversations will be over. So for that, I make my submissions.
All right, talking about Prigozhin, you're absolutely correct. And part of that statement released by the AU states that, without mentioning any names, that they would not encourage any interference by international organizations, including private military outfits. And obviously, that's probably referring to Wagner forces. And there was a video making the rounds, which you mentioned, where Prigozhin was said to have, it was seen saying that he was, the heat was 50 degrees centigrade. Although his outfit belied the fact that he was in hot climate, but the thought is that he's actually now on the African continent, and there is now obvious interference by the Russian private military outfit, Wagner. Now, moving away from that, Niger is not the first country to be suspended by the AU. So they're actually in good company, alongside other countries where there's been unconstitutional taking over in terms of taking over of power. So Mali, Burkina Faso, Guinea are currently suspended by the AU as well, or they've been suspended by the AU as well. So it's not new, and it's part of moves and efforts to ensure that, as has been emphasized a number of times with regards to Niger, the Nigerian coup, that we must protect democracy on the African continent, especially the Sahel region and West Africa, as much as possible. They have reiterated, however, that even though they're in support of ECOWAS in terms of their response and sanctions, they will investigate the impact of military action in Niger, so the socioeconomic impact, the impact on the people, before they come out with their own stance as to whether they'd be supporting a military intervention or force action force in Niger. Also, something else that is worthy of note is that they've given Niger 15-day ultimatum. Remember that Niger initially rebuffed attempts by the AU, the United Nations, and ECOWAS for dialogue, but following hard-hitting sanctions, decided to open the door. And of course, I must also mention intervention and conversations with religious leaders who had gone into Niger, to have conversations with the junta, and they said they were open to conversations with ECOWAS. So that's ongoing. We saw the video there with General Abdulsalami Abubakar, who said that they are making progress. He's given an update to the president, and that dialogue is not off the table, and he's optimistic. And that's the language we must keep up. We are optimistic. It seems as if ECOWAS will not accept the 3-year transition period requested or stated by Niger, because as we've seen in the past, look at the Nigerian coup of 1966, when military will say, we're going to transition in a number of years. It takes them multiple years afterwards. So antecedents do not give confidence in them saying 3 years we needed. They want it done now, and they want it, they want the transition now. Also, let's not forget that President Bazoum is still under house arrest. So that conversation is still there. It would be worthy of note to see what the Nigerians, in terms of the junta, would do in line with that. So we're still watching, again, pushing for dialogue. Diplomacy is the way to go. However, in the event that fails, the communication has been consistent. There might be a need to apply to apply force. Finally, I would say, the president should not or might not want to go to war, because we have seen, again, the northern position on this because of the states along that border with Niger and the impact it would have on the northern states. So they have clamored and said consistently that it's almost like going to war with their brothers. So we don't want military action in Niger, but as Rufai had mentioned, it's also important to note that in order to protect the democracy on this continent, it might be in the operative word, be the way to go. But we're hopeful that diplomacy and dialogue will reign and will solve the matter.
Let me, just before we move on to the next story, let me ask the question. It's important for us to ask ourselves, suspension by AU, what has AU ever done for any African country that the suspension from membership of that body will change anything? Well, what has it translated into?
You're right, because in terms of, if you look at Mali, Burkina Faso, and Guinea, the suspension hasn't quite achieved the desired result. But it
so suspension is a complete waste of time. What they should be doing is pull ranks and pull them in and have conversation. United Nations is not suspending Russia for their action. Right. So why should we be suspending from our own body? Okay. Anyway,
we'll move on to our next story. China says it will support plans to expand the Brics club of large emerging economies. Leaders from Brazil, India, China, and South Africa are meeting for 3 days in Johannesburg amid surging interest in the group. The alliance accounts for 40% of the world's population and a quarter of its GDP. At least 23 countries, including Iran and Argentina, have formally applied to join BRICS. President Ramaphosa says he shares China's view on expanding the alliance.
President Xi Jinping and I discussed the ongoing conflict between Russia and Ukraine and its significant impact on developing economies in Africa and elsewhere. We both agreed on the importance of dialogue and negotiation between the two sides. As South Africa, we are encouraged that President Xi Jinping has welcomed the peace mission to Russia and Ukraine initiated by African leaders.
While the leaders of Brazil, India, and China are meeting in person for the 15th BRICS summit, Russia's President Vladimir Putin is participating virtually. It follows an international criminal court warrant for the Russian leader's arrest related to alleged war crimes in Ukraine. Instead, Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov will take his place. Putin spoke in a pre-recorded speech denouncing sanctions against his country.
Repeatedly said that our country is able to substitute Ukrainian grain both on a commercial basis and in the form of gratuitous aid to the countries in need, especially since we are again expected to have an excellent harvest this year. As a first step, we have decided to send 25 to 50,000 tons of grain to each of 6 African countries free of charge, including free delivery of these cargoes. The international economic situation is also being seriously affected by the illegitimate practice of sanctions, the illegal freezing of the assets of sovereign states, and, in fact, the violation of all the basic norms and rules of free trade and economic life that seemed inviolable not so long ago. The irreversible, objective process of de-dollarization of our, of the members of Brics, economic ties is gaining momentum, and efforts are being made to develop effective mechanisms for mutual settlements and monetary control. As a result, the share of the dollar in export-import transactions within the Brics is declining. Last year it amounted to only 28.7%.
BRICS Summit still ongoing in Johannesburg, South Africa. We talked about this yesterday. This is a developing story. Okay.
Yeah, it is a developing story. There is definitely signs of crack in the wall within BRICS, and there is a number of people who are proposing or who are making it clear that expansion at this point might not be a good idea, and a number of reasons, I can't remember off the top of my head some of the reasons that have been highlighted why expansion should not be their move. Let them consolidate first, especially in the light of what is going on between Russia and Ukraine. So Russia has got to sort out the problem with Ukraine. If that was not in existence, then BRICS will be a big bride that most of the other developing countries will want to join, because there are so many countries that are worried that the way the United Nations is going, it will just be all about America and Europe. But for you to be in a position to say you want to join BRICS, you look at what Russia is doing to Ukraine, and you're beginning to think another superpower is evolving and building its own bloc. For what reason? For the reason of just being able to extend its own power and not necessarily to help you. China, yes, is doing whatever it can, and the second largest economy in the world, and it's doing everything to make sure that it consolidates its position. But BRICS has to just focus on building its own bridges and sorting out its own internal issues, and then making sure that they stand firm on Russia getting away from this Ukraine war that is not helping anybody. Russia is not helping anybody with this, and it's affecting BRICS, I think.
All right, we're fine.
So the expansion thought about BRICS is well on its way, and this is a bright time for BRICS. BRICS is doing very well, and the numbers are there to prove it. Dilma Rousseff is the chair of the BRICS Bank, which is called the New Development Bank. And in fact, she said there are about 15 countries that are already applied to join BRICS, and they are taking their sweet time to be able to pick about 5 of them to come to the fray. For last year, for instance, they earmarked about $10 billion worth of loans for the country. And what they say with their argument is that they are not going to be like the World Bank that gives you conditions. So everybody's free to come. And everybody wants to be on the bandwagon. Yes, I understand the Russian crisis and Ukraine crisis and all of that, but it's never been a very productive time for BRICS, having the second largest economy of the world. You know, also having Brazil, a very veritable economy in the world, and other leaders out there. So it's a glowing time for, BRICS, and it is part of that their ideology to say, okay, let us look for alternative currencies to challenge the dollar. Because we all know how the dollar emerged. Pretty much it was after the Second World War and the strength of the dollar increased and Bretton Woods and all of that. But BRICS is saying, we even want to start lending in Chinese yuan and real, in Brazilian real. So the expansion of BRICS is surging on big time. That summit they're having in South Africa is an affirmation. 15 countries are saying we want to join. They haven't taken their sweet time to say, okay, before you come in, let's weigh things. And I'm sure the Americans are looking on the other side and saying, oh, these guys are really, really top in the charts, because other people have tried to put in all sorts of unions. It's not worked. If my memory serves right, I think it was former French President Sarkozy or thereabout that tried starting up a little union called the Mediterranean Union and all of that. It didn't really fly as much as, BRIC. So it's about how countries can look the way of this. But when you also look at the argument, on the grand scheme of things, they talk about probable disconnect with Americans. We tried it here. at some point. We tried having a partnership with, the Chinese for their renminbi and all of that, for export and all of that. I don't know how that went, but the American frowned at that. So it's just in that world supremacy ideology fight. There's something called the Peloponnesian Wars in Greek mythological history. And many political philosophers have written about something called the Thucydides trap, which is the fight for supremacy, and two nations want to usurp each other. That Thucydides trap has been going on between China and America for a while. And if China has some allies in BRIC, then it will help them a great deal. And they've coalesced efforts, even in the Russian war. You can see the reason why Russia has been able to stabilize, because when the other parts of the West stopped buying their oil, the likes of India and China were still buying their oil big time. So BRIC is on the resurgent form, and probably maybe some African countries. I don't know the list of the 15 that want to join, but probably you'll be shocked to find countries like, maybe we as a country might be angling to join. I don't know what it's going to be. But we have close, we have close partnership with Americans.
Yeah, actually. Yes, absolutely correct. In terms of BRICS, we had mentioned this yesterday that some of what would be on the agenda would be one, expansion, two, the new development bank, and the perhaps conversation around a localized currency that unites the member nations of BRICS, and wanting to moderate America's influence and power in geopolitics. That's really what the agenda is. And as you said, I think it's just spot on. Fight for supremacy. This challenge of America as a superpower, the West as a superpower. And they do seem to be gaining some ground. Last year, $30 billion in loans to member nations of BRICS. That is attractive for any nation to want to be a member of that, of the body. And don't forget as well that with the stringent conditions of the World Bank and IMF, for struggling nations, it is attractive. And you don't even have to struggle, because I hear Saudi Arabia is said to be one of those countries angling to be, a member of BRICS. A number of other countries are said to also have formally applied and are looking to also be members of BRICS. We see Russia, China is said to be the biggest beneficiary of this, being currently the second largest economy in the world. Also the trade war between China and America, they'll be looking to consolidate on that. So definitely they're open to having more people join and strengthening the power and influence of BRICS. It hasn't yet been decided, it must be said, whether they will formally, adopt these nations or welcome these nations. And on the lighter side, I wonder what the name would be. Would it still remain BRICS if they do admit these other nations? Because of course we know that BRICS is an acronym for the founding members of the body: Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. South Africa being the only African country in that particular bloc. Will they be looking to invite more people? I doubt it very much if Nigeria would join at this point, or would apply to join at this point, because of diplomatic relationships with America and the United Kingdom. However, we must also point out the fact that we have also entered into some really significant trade deals with China. So that might also be an incentive. And we've talked about a number of times how we need money. We need to, borrow, do a bit of borrowing, despite the fact that it's not ideal. But because of where we find ourselves in terms of the foreign reserves, we might have to borrow to fund some of the projects that we currently have, and of course to stabilize the naira. We might see BRICS as an opportunity to lend us that money without the stringent conditions tied to it. But so perhaps it will also challenge the World Bank, challenge the United States in terms of trying to woo and sustain relationships with countries that they currently enjoy, so that they don't go over the BRICS side of life. We'll continue to watch. At the end of the summit, we will obviously have updates on that, whether it will be formally adopted as to the countries being, to the expansion of BRICS. We'll move on to our next story. The British police have charged Nigeria's former Minister of Petroleum, Diezani Alison Madueke, with bribery offences, saying they suspected she had accepted bribes in return for awarding multi-million-pound oil and gas contracts. She is to appear at the Westminster Magistrates Court on October the 2nd. Alison Madueke was a key figure in the administration of former President Goodluck Jonathan, serving in his cabinet from 2010 to 2015. She also served as president of the Organization of the Petroleum Exporting Countries, OPEC. The National Crime Agency says Alison Madueke was accused of benefiting from at least £100,000 in cash, chauffeur-driven cars, flights on private jets, luxury holidays for her family, and the use of multiple London properties. She denies all charges of corruption. Okay. Diezani Alison Madueke, the powerful petroleum minister, the first female president of OPEC, and I believe the first female minister of petroleum as well. Back in the news.
It's a very interesting one. To a large extent, a lot of Nigerians are happy, I think, from what I've heard. At least most of them that I've heard are happy that United Kingdom is picking on those who have chosen to have criminal intentions and to want to destroy the economy of their nation by stealing money or by being corrupt in their ways of dealing with public purse. It is good that they're doing this, but my concern is that they have spent several years, 4 or 5 years plus now on this case. And in all of this, all they can come up with is that she stayed in some people's house, that she is collecting jewelries as gifts. I'm expecting to see a really profound amount of money, disturbing amount of money, because all the allegations that Nigerians were sharing was that billions of naira, millions of dollars were being used and were stolen during the era of President Jonathan. And this woman, Mrs. Diezani Alison Madueke, is right behind it. So I expect to find a case of loads of dollars being said, not $100,000. So I'm concerned that some money is still somewhere and it's not being found, or the allegation of massive level of corruption is really not there. Because if it is there, then, like President Jonathan has said during his tenure, he said that if it is true, America will know. If it is true, FBI will know. He said that before. But I would expect that MI5 and all the intelligence agency, National Crime Agency in United Kingdom, and the Crown Prosecution, they would have sat down and they've done investigation over the years. I would expect that they will come up with something better than this. I don't know whether this can stick. And even if it does, it probably will just mean, look at the seriousness of the allegation. She's probably going to get a slap on the wrist for maybe a year or 2 or 3. It couldn't possibly be more than 5 years, unless they want to use her as an example and then give her a large number of years that it could be turned over if the case proceeds to their own Supreme Court. But I know that quite a lot of Nigerians who are not happy with what happened under Jonathan's era are happy that this is happening, but they're also concerned that, is this all they could find after so many years? Where's the rest of the money if it actually happened?
So I'd like us to go into the facts of what they found, and we must also this morning commend the Nigerian authorities, the EFCC, because this was a collaborative work between our authorities here and I think they are called the NCA abroad. So it was a collaborative work, so they couldn't have done it alone. It was also a collaborative work with the EFCC, and this partnership has been solid between them. What the fact of the case says, yes, Diezani is 63 years of age, former OPEC chief, as we said. She's alleged to have benefited from at least £100,000 in cash, chauffeur-driven cars, flights and private jet, luxury holidays, and all of that. Her charge also detailed financial reward, including furniture, renovation work, staff of the property, payment of private school fees, and gift from high designer shops such as Cartier and all of that, Louis Vuitton. So it's not only about the 100,000, and there are also other gifts, you know. She currently lives in St. John's Woods. I mean, top Nigerians, about Nigerians live in St. John's. She's going to appear in the Magistrate Court on the 2nd of October. Andy Kelly, the head of the NCA International Corruption Unit, he said, we suspect that Diezani abused her power in Nigeria and accepted financial rewards. We cannot sit here and preempt what the court would do, because that will be sub judice. All we can just say is they'll be able to look at the facts of the case. Diezani too will be able to put her facts forward on the case and, you know, let us know what happened. And also concerning what is happening, there are also assets worth millions of pounds sterling relating to the alleged offenses that have been frozen as part of ongoing investigation. So it's not just about the 100,000. In March this year, NCA also provided evidence to the U.S. Department of Justice that enabled them recovered assets totaling $53.1 million linked to Diezani in a corruption case. ICU officers also worked closely with EFCC of Nigeria, and that's why I say kudos to the EFCC, as well as the NCA-hosted International Anti-Corruption Coordinated Center. Right? And the current prosecution has authorized the NCA to charge Diezani with bribery offenses, and the criminal proceedings are active, and she has a right to fair trial. So it's not just only about the 100K and the gifts, they're also linking millions. And you saw the case of the $53.1 million. So that's the full factor of the case. But we can't talk here because the judges will have to look at the case and sit on the case in the UK. They'll go through the full gamut. But I think the formative word here in all of this is that, no matter how long it is, the long arm of the law will definitely catch up. It doesn't pay to be corrupt. And when people go into office, they should do that in truth and in honesty to serving, our country. I think that's a watchword for the new ministers out there. But we cannot comment on the case because it is the whole legal process that will make the final decision of the case, so that it not be seen as sub judice.
Yes, absolutely. Well, just to mention that the Buhari administration had sought to extradite Mrs. Alison Madueke, but this wasn't quite successful. Recall that she had gone to the UK on account of her health in 2015 and had said to have undergone treatment for an aggressive form of cancer. And so she had said that she wasn't running away from Nigeria or the law. It was just that she had to look after her own health. Now, fast forward later, we see the NCA, that's the National Crime Agency of the United Kingdom, saying that they are going to take her to court on allegations of bribery, even though her lawyers have come out to say that she was going to fight this forcefully and fight any allegations of corruption and bribery. Now, as is often said, that when we invite the minister on allegations of bribery and corruption, sometimes it's important to also investigate the principal. But this is often not seen because the minister is an employee of her principal. And therefore, it's hardly in cases like this that the principal is unaware of what transpired in her office, or perhaps turned a blind eye. So that conversation often comes up as to when we castigate ministers and ministries, should we also not look at the leaders or the person who employed the minister, male or female, how or she, into that office, and perhaps if they were complicit? Was she working on behalf of someone? Was she remitting funds to someone? If she's found guilty, of course, the court will decide on that. But she has consistently said that she is innocent of any wrongdoing with regards to corruption charges, and she will fight to the finish to defend her name and her reputation. On the 2nd of October, when she appears in court, we'll begin to see and unfold. But I must also say that the UK is different, with all due respect to our Nigerian system, that when they have a case against you, it's usually watertight. They have possibly gone through the books, and it would be interesting to see the outcome of this particular case.